The journey into the afterlife is one of humanity's oldest and most profound quests. Across ancient cultures, the question of what lies beyond death has haunted and fascinated people for millennia. In ancient Egypt, this question was not just philosophical, but deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, religion, and mythology. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end but rather a transition, a passage from one realm to another. And guiding this passage, ensuring the safe journey of every soul, was Anubis, the god of the afterlife, funerary rites, and mummification. Imagine, just for a moment, the stillness of an Egyptian evening, where the air is thick with mystery and the horizon is bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. The night is coming, and with it, the fear of what happens after death, an inevitable fate for all living things. The people of Egypt, however, found solace in their beliefs. They trusted that the gods had laid out a path, one that began with a physical death, but led to something much greater. And at the head of this journey was Anubis, a god whose name still echoes through the corridors of time. Anubis was no ordinary god, no mere figure in a pantheon of deities. He represented something much more intimate and personal. The guide, the protector, the one who ensured that the soul reached its destination in the afterlife. His realm was not one of the living, but of the dead, and it was here that he found his true purpose. And while other gods like Osiris might have reigned over the grand concept of the afterlife, it was Anubis who performed the crucial and often perilous task of ensuring safe passage. To understand Anubis, we must first consider the world in which the ancient Egyptians lived. Death to them was not a mysterious, unknowable event. It was something they could understand, predict, and prepare for. Death was part of the cycle of life, and it held no fear for those who believed in the gods. The Egyptians thought of death as an entrance to another world, a world where the soul would be judged and, depending on the outcome, allowed to enter a peaceful and eternal paradise or be condemned to a second death, one far worse than any earthly end. But this journey wasn't a simple passage. It was fraught with dangers, trials, and obstacles that would test the very essence of a soul's being. To navigate these challenges and reach the final destination, an eternity of peace and fulfillment, required guidance. This is where Anubis, the jackal-headed god, entered the picture. He was not a god of destruction or vengeance, but of protection and guidance. He was the one who helped the soul face these trials, the one who would ensure that the heart of the deceased, weighed against a feather of truth, would tip in their favor. Anubis' journey as a deity began long before he became associated with the dead. The stories of his origins vary, but the most widely accepted narrative is that he was the son of Osiris, the god of the dead, and Nephthys, the goddess of night. Anubis' birth itself was not typical, as it was entwined with the death of Osiris. The myth tells us that Nephthys, who was married to Set but loved Osiris, sought to bear his child. In a moment of passion, Nephthys gave birth to Anubis, but not without complications. She had to abandon him at birth. It was only through protection of Isis, Osiris' wife and sister, that Anubis survived. From the very beginning, Anubis' existence was tied to death and rebirth, making him the perfect god to guide souls in the afterlife. His role was not to judge, but to help the soul prepare for judgment. Anubis was the one who oversaw the process of mummification, ensuring that the physical body, essential for the soul's journey, was preserved for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed a properly preserved body to enter the next world, and Anubis, with his jackal-headed form, became synonymous with the embalming and mummification processes. Jackals, being scavengers that would often be seen near burial grounds, were associated with death in ancient Egypt, which made Anubis' form as a jackal particularly fitting for his role as a protector of the dead. The mummification process itself was an intricate ritual, designed not just to preserve the body, but to prepare the soul for the challenges ahead. Anubis, as the god of this process, watched over every step, from the careful removal of organs to the wrapping of the body in linen. Each act performed was seen as a necessary step to ensure the deceased will be able to safely navigate the trials of the afterlife. In this role, Anubis was both a healer and a guide, helping preserve the body while preparing the soul for the long journey ahead. Yet, Anubis' role didn't stop with mummification. Once the body was prepared, it was time for the soul to journey into the underworld, a place known as the Duat. This realm was not one of eternal darkness, but a vast and dangerous place, filled with challenges, monsters, and gods. The soul, now ready for its journey, would need to cross the Duat with Anubis as its guide. Anubis' job was to ensure that the soul passed through these trials unscathed and reached the final judgment. The most crucial moment of this journey occurred in the Hall of Ma'at, where the soul would face the weighing of the heart. This was a defining moment where the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart, heavy with sin, was weighed down, the soul would be devoured by Amit, the demoness of the underworld. But if the heart was light, the soul would be allowed to pass on to the fields of reeds, an eternal paradise. Anubis stood by during this process, overseeing the judgment and ensuring the fairness of the scales. It was here, at this moment of truth, that Anubis' power as a protector and guide was most felt. He was not a god of punishment or wrath. He was a god of preparation, of ensuring that the soul had done everything necessary to pass the test. And in this peaceful, silent role, Anubis became the calm in the storm, the constant presence in a world filled with uncertainty. The Egyptians' deep belief in the afterlife, in the power of Anubis, shaped not only their funerary practices, but also their worldview. Death was not something to be feared, but something to be prepared for, and Anubis was the one who stood at the threshold, waiting to lead the deceased into eternity. As the viewer settles into this world, drifting into sleep, one might feel the weight of history's quiet yet profound understanding of life and death. The stories of Anubis and his role in the afterlife are not just ancient tales. They are timeless reminders of our shared human need to understand what lies beyond. And just as the ancient Egyptians found comfort in the thought of Anubis standing beside them as they crossed over, so too could we find a sense of peace in knowing that perhaps, after all, death is merely the next great journey. Anubis, the enigmatic god of the afterlife, emerged from a complex web of myths that reflect the ancient Egyptians' deep understanding of life, death, and the journey beyond. To fully appreciate his significance, one must first delve into the ancient Egyptian view of the divine, particularly the way they perceived the roles of gods and how those roles intersected with the human experience. Anubis, as one of the most revered deities, was not born into a simple narrative. His birth story is filled with divine twists, familial entanglements, and cosmic significance. To understand Anubis, one must first understand the gods and the complex world in which they interacted. The myth of Anubis' birth is not only a story of divine parentage, but also a tale of the gods' connections, their loves, and their betrayals. It all begins with the legendary figure of Osiris, one of the most powerful and beloved gods in the Egyptian pantheon. Osiris was a god of the afterlife, and he held sway over the kingdom of the dead. He was both a king and a guide, beloved by the people for his wisdom and fairness. His wife, Isis, was a goddess of magic, healing, and motherhood, deeply devoted to her husband and to preserving the life of the deceased. Together, they represented balance, fertility, and the cycles of nature. But their union was not without its complications. Osiris had an adversary, a brother named Set, who embodied chaos, disorder, and destruction. Set's envy of Osiris' power led him to a dark act of betrayal that would have lasting consequences for both the gods and the humans who revered them. Set trapped Osiris in a coffin, sealing him inside and casting the coffin into the Nile River, where it was carried away to be lost forever. This act of treachery, fueled by jealousy and resentment, set off a chain of events that would forever alter the course of Egyptian mythology. Isis, in her grief, searched tirelessly for her husband's body, and after much suffering and persistence, she found Osiris' remains. However, the tragedy did not end there. Set discovered what had happened and, in a fit of rage, tore Osiris' body into pieces, scattering them across Egypt. Isis, again, took it upon herself to gather the pieces of Osiris, and, with the help of her sister Nephthys and the god Anubis, she managed to reassemble his body. Through her magic and devotion, Osiris was temporarily resurrected, though he would never again fully return to the land of the living. This moment of brief resurrection was one of the most poignant in Egyptian mythology. It symbolized the eternal bond between life and death, and also gave rise to the birth of a new god, Anubis. In some versions of myth, Anubis' birth is said to have been a result of a secret union between Nephthys, the sister of Isis, and Osiris himself. Nephthys, despite being married to Set, had fallen in love with Osiris, and their affair produced a child. However, the circumstances surrounding Anubis' birth were not straightforward. Nephthys, realizing the divine nature of the child, abandoned him soon after his birth. The newborn god was left to be cared for by Isis, who took him in as her own. While the exact details of Anubis' birth vary depending on the version of the myth, there is a strong sense of divine destiny woven throughout the narrative. Anubis was not just any child. He was the son of Osiris, the god who ruled the afterlife, and his birth was tied intrinsically to the fate of the dead and the preservation of the soul. This birth story is crucial to understanding Anubis' role in Egyptian mythology. He was not simply born into a family of gods, but was born from a cosmic struggle between order and chaos, life and death, creation and destruction. His very existence was tied to the divine will that would govern the afterlife. Anubis' role was not to bring life, but to preserve it in the realm of the dead. His responsibilities were far beyond the realm of mere mortals. He was tasked with guiding souls through the mysteries of the afterlife and ensuring that they were properly cared for in death. After his birth, Anubis was raised by Isis, who was determined to protect him and ensure that he grew into a powerful and capable god. He was given a place among the other deities, although his nature and role were still being defined. From a young age, it was clear that Anubis had a special connection to the dead. Unlike the other gods, who were associated with life and creation, Anubis was tied to the realm of death. He would eventually become protector and guide of the deceased, a god whose name was synonymous with the journey of the soul into the afterlife. One of the key aspects of Anubis' nature is his connection to mummification. In ancient Egypt, mummification was not just a funerary practice. It was an essential step in ensuring that the soul could continue its journey into the afterlife. The preservation of the body was believed to be necessary for the soul's survival, and Anubis was the god who oversaw this process. He was a patron of embalmers and protector of the dead, ensuring that the body was properly prepared for the journey ahead. The mummification process was an intricate ritual, carried out with great care and precision. Anubis' role in this process was not just symbolic, but practical. He was thought to be the one who performed the most important aspects of the embalming, such as the removal of internal organs and the preservation of the body. As a god, Anubis was believed to possess the divine knowledge needed to ensure that the deceased would be properly prepared for the afterlife. His hands guided the embalmers, and his power ensured that the soul could continue its journey undisturbed. In Egyptian iconography, Anubis is typically depicted with the head of jackal or as a fully jackal-bodied figure. The jackal was a creature closely associated with death and burial sites. It was often seen scavenging around cemeteries where the dead were laid to rest. Because of this, the jackal became a symbol of the protector of the dead. Anubis' jackal head represents both his connection to death and a protective nature. He was not a god who brought about death, but one who ensured that those who died were cared for and protected in their journey to the afterlife. As the god of the dead, Anubis also played a key role in guiding souls through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Duat was a vast and complex realm, full of dangers, challenges, and trials. The journey through the Duat was not a simple one, and the soul had to pass through various obstacles in order to reach the afterlife. Anubis, as the protector of the dead, ensured that the soul would have a safe passage through these perils. He was the one who stood by as the soul navigated the trials of the afterlife, ensuring that it was not lost or devoured by the monsters and demons that inhabited the Duat. One of the most important aspects of Anubis' role was his involvement in the weighing of the heart, a crucial event in the journey of the soul. After passing through the Duat, the soul would face the ultimate judgment in the Hall of Maat. Here, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul would be allowed to pass into the afterlife. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul would be condemned to eternal oblivion. Anubis, as the god of funerary rites, was the one who oversaw this judgment. He would be the one to ensure that the scales were balanced and that the judgment was fair. In this role, Anubis was both a guide and protector, ensuring that the soul was prepared for the final test. His presence during the judgment was a source of comfort, as it was believed that Anubis would not let any soul pass through the judgment unprepared. His role in the afterlife was not just one of oversight, but also one of compassion, as he ensured that the soul was ready for whatever lay beyond. The myth of Anubis' birth reflects the deep connection between life, death, and the divine. It is a story of divine protection, of love and loss, and of the responsibilities that come with guarding the transition from one world to the next. Through his birth, Anubis was not only given the role of a god of the dead, but also the weighty task of ensuring that the souls of the departed were cared for and protected. His role was not merely ceremonial or symbolic. It was one of deep, personal significance to the Egyptians. Through him, they found peace in the face of death, knowing that the god of the afterlife would guide them safely to the other side. The tale of Osiris is one of the most important myths in ancient Egyptian religion, and it serves as a backdrop to understanding Anubis' role as the god of the afterlife. The narrative of Osiris, his death, and his eventual resurrection is both tragic and redemptive, a powerful reflection on the themes of life, death, betrayal, and rebirth. This myth shaped the Egyptian worldview of the afterlife and, in turn, defined the roles of gods like Anubis, who ensured that the souls of the deceased would follow the same cycle of transformation, trial, and eventual peace. But to understand Anubis' involvement in this cosmic drama, we must first explore the fate of Osiris and the critical moments that established Anubis' destiny as a protector of the dead. Osiris was one of the most beloved gods in ancient Egypt. As the god of agriculture, fertility, and the afterlife, he was associated with life-giving forces, the cycles of nature, and the regeneration of the earth. Osiris represented order, harmony, and life, qualities that were deeply intertwined with the well-being of the living and the soul's journey beyond. His reign was considered a golden age. During his rule, Egypt flourished and the land was bountiful. Osiris taught humanity how to cultivate crops, establish laws, and live harmoniously with the natural world. As a result, he was revered not only as a god, but as a king who brought civilization to Egypt. However, Osiris' reign was not without enemies, and the most formidable of them all was his brother, Set. Set was a god of chaos, storms, and violence, an embodiment of destruction and disorder. Unlike Osiris, who represented life and creation, Set represented death and annihilation. He was a god of unpredictable and violent forces, both in the natural world and in the hearts of men. Set's envy of Osiris' power, popularity, and the stability he had brought to Egypt festered into a deep resentment. Set wanted the throne for himself, and the only way he saw to achieve this was through deceit and murder. In one of the most dramatic moments in Egyptian mythology, Set devised a cunning plan to eliminate his brother Osiris. Set crafted a magnificent, ornate coffin, perfectly designed to fit Osiris' body. He invited Osiris to a banquet and presented the coffin as a gift, promising that whoever could fit perfectly inside, it would be granted its possession. Osiris, innocent and trusting, lay down in the coffin to see if it fit. As soon as he did, Set and his followers sealed the coffin, trapping Osiris inside. They then cast it into the Nile River, where it was swept away and lost, sinking into the depths of the sea. The murder of Osiris was a deeply traumatic event for the Egyptian people. Osiris, the god who had once brought life to the land, was now dead, and with him, the earth itself seemed to lose its vitality. In the wake of Osiris' disappearance, chaos began to take hold of the land. Crops failed, the skies darkened, and the harmony that had once characterized Egypt was replaced by disorder. Yet, despite such destructive power, he could not entirely overcome the love and devotion that Osiris had inspired in the hearts of his followers. Osiris' wife, Isis, a goddess of love, magic, and healing, was heartbroken by her husband's disappearance. Determined not to let Set's evil triumph, Isis embarked on a tireless journey to find Osiris' body and bring him back. Her love and devotion for her husband were unshakable, and her resolve was as strong as any divine power. For days, she searched high and low, overcoming countless obstacles and battling fierce creatures sent by Set to thwart her quest. After an arduous journey, Isis, with the help of her sister Nephthys and the god Anubis, discovered the body of Osiris. It had been washed up on the banks of the Nile, encased in a tree that had grown around it. The tree had become sacred, and Isis performed a ritual of mourning and reverence. But the joy of finding Osiris was short-lived. Set, furious at Isis' success, found the body and in a violent rage tore Osiris into pieces. Set scattered these pieces across Egypt, further deepening the tragedy. Once again, Isis was left to pick up the pieces of her husband's shattered body. Along with Nephthys, she traveled the land, searching for fragments of Osiris. When the last piece was recovered, they were able to reassemble his body, and with the help of powerful magic, Isis was able to temporarily restore Osiris to life. Though Osiris would never fully return to the world of the living, this brief resurrection was a moment of hope, for it symbolized that death was not the final end. The myth of Osiris, in this moment, reflected the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth, a process that would echo through Egyptian religion for centuries. This resurrection, however, was not the end of the story. Osiris, though revived in spirit, would never return to rule the land of the living. Instead, he became the god of the afterlife, ruler of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The power of death, of rebirth, and of eternal life was now his domain. Osiris' role in the afterlife was not one of judgment or punishment, but of guidance and restoration. As a god who understood both life and death, Osiris offered those who died a chance for renewal and transformation. Anubis, as Osiris' son in some versions of the myth, played a critical role in this transition. While Osiris presided over the eternal realm of the dead, it was Anubis who took on the responsibility of guiding souls through the trials of the Duat, the perilous underworld that separated the living from the afterlife. Anubis' task was to ensure that souls made it safely through the dangerous journey of the Duat and arrived at the judgment hall of Osiris, where the final judgment would be rendered. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the soul would embark on a journey through the Duat, facing numerous challenges and trials. The Duat was a vast, dark, and mysterious place, filled with monsters, serpents, and other dangers that could prevent a soul from reaching its final resting place. Anubis, as the god of funerary rites, had the crucial task of guiding the deceased through these trials. It was his responsibility to ensure that the soul was protected, that it passed through the dangers of the underworld, and that it was properly prepared for the final judgment before Osiris. The journey of the soul was not just a physical one. It was a spiritual transformation. The deceased, upon entering the Duat, had to undergo a process of purification. The soul would encounter various obstacles, including monsters that sought to devour it, dark rivers that had to be crossed, and spirits that tested its worthiness. At each stage, Anubis would be there, offering protection, ensuring that the soul remained on the right path, and helping prepare it for the final judgment. His presence was both calming and reassuring, a guide through a world that was both mysterious and terrifying. The weighing of the heart, perhaps the most famous and significant event in the Egyptian afterlife, was the moment when the soul was finally judged. Anubis played a key role in this judgment. In the hall of Maat, the goddess of truth, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat to determine whether the soul was worthy of entering the afterlife. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul was deemed pure and allowed to pass into the eternal realm of Osiris. If the heart was heavy with sin, the soul was devoured by the demoness Ammit, marking the end of its journey. Anubis' role in the weighing of the heart was one of guidance and support. He was the one who ensured that the judgment was fair, that the scales of Maat were balanced, and that the soul's fate was justly determined. Unlike other gods in the pantheon, Anubis did not mete out punishment. His role was not to judge the soul, but to ensure that it would prepare for judgment, to help the deceased navigate the trials of the afterlife, and to stand as a silent protector during the most important moment of the soul's journey. The myth of Osiris, along with Anubis' role in the afterlife, reveals much about the Egyptian view of death and rebirth. It reflects their belief in the cyclical nature of existence, how life, death, and resurrection are all interconnected. Osiris' death and resurrection represented the eternal cycle of nature, and Anubis, as his son, became the embodiment of the guidance and protection necessary for the soul to transcend death and reach the afterlife. Through Anubis, the Egyptians found comfort in knowing that death was not the end, but rather a transition to another realm, a journey where protection, judgment, and renewal awaited the soul. This myth, rich in symbolism and emotion, became a central part of the Egyptian religious worldview and helped shape their understanding of life, death, and the eternal journey beyond. Anubis' role in the ancient Egyptian belief system is one of the most profound and enduring legacies of their civilization. While Osiris may have been the god of the afterlife, Anubis was the god who ensured that souls safely traversed the difficult path from death to eternity. His role as a protector of the dead was not simply ceremonial or symbolic. It was deeply tied to the practicalities of mummification and the preservation of life after death. Anubis, with his unique abilities and divine connection to the underworld, served as the pivotal figure in ensuring that the deceased had the necessary protection and guidance to face the perilous journey to the afterlife. From a young age, Anubis was destined to take on a crucial responsibility in Egyptian religion. Born from the union of Osiris and Nephthys in some versions of the myth, Anubis was intrinsically tied to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. His birth was one steeped in both tragedy and divine will, marked by the death of Osiris and the divine desire to ensure that the souls of the dead were cared for. His mother, Nephthys, abandoned him shortly after birth, but Isis, the devoted wife of Osiris, took him in and raised him as her own. This bond between Anubis and Isis, and later with Osiris, cemented his divine destiny as a protector and guide of souls in the afterlife. Unlike many of the other gods who represented aspects of life creation or destruction, Anubis' domain was death itself. While other deities such as Ra represented the life-giving forces of the sun, Anubis presided over the crucial moment of transition, the crossing from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. Anubis was not seen as a god of death in the sense of bringing it about, but rather one who ensured that those who died were properly prepared for the journey ahead. It was his responsibility to ensure that every deceased person received the necessary care and protection to make the transition as peaceful and secure as possible. One of the key aspects of Anubis' role was his connection to the process of mummification. In ancient Egypt, mummification was not just a funerary practice. It was an essential ritual designed to preserve the body for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the physical body was necessary for the soul to recognize itself and continue its journey after death. Anubis' direct involvement in mummification made him the god who oversaw the preservation of the body, ensuring that the deceased would be equipped to enter the afterlife with a body that had been properly cared for. In this sense, Anubis served as both the divine embalmer and protector of the deceased, ensuring that no harm befall the body during the mummification process. The mummification process itself was long and meticulous, a procedure that required great care and precision. It involved the removal of the internal organs, the drying of the body with natron salts, the wrapping of the body in linen, and the final placement in a tomb. Each step was performed with the utmost reverence, as the Egyptians believed that the preservation of the body was necessary for the soul's journey to continue. Anubis' role was critical in this process, not only as a protector but also as a divine figure who imparted the knowledge of how to perform the embalming ritual. Anubis was often depicted as a jackal or as a man with the head of a jackal. The choice of the jackal as a symbol was significant. Jackals were scavengers, often seen in cemeteries, where they would feast on the remains of the dead. This connection to the process of decay made the jackal an appropriate symbol for the god of funerary rites. The jackal's association with death, burial, and the afterlife gave Anubis the role of overseeing the transition of the soul from the physical world to the underworld. The jackal's keen sense of smell and ability to detect death further emphasized Anubis' connection to the realm of the deceased. As a protector of the dead, Anubis also played a crucial role in ensuring that the deceased were properly prepared for the journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Duat was a place of great danger, filled with monsters, demons, and various obstacles that could derail the soul's journey to the afterlife. Souls that were unprepared or who lacked proper protection could be lost in the Duat, never reaching their final destination. This is where Anubis' role became even more significant. He was not just a god of mummification, but also the guide who helped souls navigate to the perilous underworld. The Duat was not a simple destination. It was a complex and ever-changing realm, a place where the soul encountered trials that tested its worthiness and strength. It was filled with serpents, darkness, rivers, and all manner of challenges that could prevent the soul from passing through to the afterlife. Anubis, however, stood as a protector, guiding the souls with patience and care, ensuring they faced each trial with strength and determination. His guidance was not only physical but also spiritual, as he helped the deceased understand and overcome the symbolic obstacles they faced. The journey through the Duat was not just a test of strength or endurance. It was a test of the soul's purity and righteousness. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul had to pass through various stages of purification before it could be judged by the gods. It was Anubis who ensured that the soul remained pure, free from the taint of sin, and ready for the final judgment. The Duat was a place where the soul's true character was revealed, and Anubis was a god who helped it stay on the path to purity. At the end of the journey through the Duat, the soul would arrive at the Hall of Ma'at, where the most crucial moment in the afterlife awaited, the weighing of the heart. In this ceremony, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. The heart, which was believed to contain the essence of a person's soul, was placed on one side of the scale, while the feather of Maat, symbolizing truth, was placed on the other. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul was considered pure and was granted access to the fields of reeds, an eternal paradise. If the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul was condemned to eternal oblivion. Anubis' role in the weighing of the heart was not to judge the soul, but to ensure that the judgment was fair. He was the one who stood by as the scales were balanced, watching closely as the soul's fate was determined. Anubis was also responsible for ensuring that the process was carried out properly. He oversaw the weighing, ensuring that the judgment was just and that the soul had been properly prepared for this final test. Anubis' presence at this moment was a symbol of his unwavering commitment to protecting the souls of the deceased and ensuring that they faced their final judgment with dignity and respect. Anubis was not only a protector, but also a guide. He helped the soul prepare for the final judgment and ensured that the soul's journey through the afterlife was smooth and secure. His role as a guide was not limited to the physical realm, but extended to the spiritual as well. Anubis was the one who understood the intricacies of the afterlife, and it was his divine knowledge that allowed him to guide the deceased through the various stages of their journey. While Anubis' involvement in the mummification process and his role as a guide through the do-it are central to his identity, his relationship with the other gods also sheds light on his significance in Egyptian mythology. Anubis was the son of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and Nephthys, the goddess of night and morning. His parentage gave him a unique position in the pantheon of Egyptian gods, as he was both the son of the god of death and protector of the deceased. His role as Osiris' son also aligned with the themes of death and rebirth, as Osiris was a god who died and was resurrected, bringing with him the promise of eternal life. Anubis' connection to Osiris was crucial to his role in the afterlife. As the god of death, Osiris presided over the realm of the dead, offering eternal rest to those who passed the judgment. Anubis, as his son, was the one who ensured that the souls of the deceased made it to Osiris' realm. He was not just a passive figure in the afterlife, but an active participant in the journey of the soul. His relationship with Osiris emphasized the cyclical nature of life and death in Egyptian religion, where death was not an end but a transformation, a passage to another world. Anubis was a god whose duties were as varied as they were vital. He was a god of mummification, the protector of the dead, and the guide through the afterlife. His role was to ensure that the deceased were prepared for the journey ahead, that they faced the trials of the do-it with strength and purity, and that they were judged fairly in the hall of Maat. Through Anubis, the ancient Egyptians found a sense of security and comfort in the face of death, knowing that their souls would be protected and guided through the mysteries of the afterlife. Anubis, in many ways, represented the balance between life and death, offering both physical protection and spiritual guidance to those who pass from one world to the next. Anubis' influence as a divine figure in ancient Egyptian mythology cannot be overstated. While many gods and goddesses played roles in the cycle of life and death, it was Anubis who stood as the ultimate protector and guide for the dead. His connection to the physical world and the spiritual afterlife was vital to the ancient Egyptians, and his role was both intimate and profound, extending far beyond mere ritual and ceremony. For the Egyptians, the passage from life to death was not an end but a transformation, a transition that demanded protection, care, and guidance. Anubis, in his many roles, was the one who ensured this journey was as smooth as possible. His responsibility was not just to oversee death, but to guide the soul safely through it, ensuring that it was not lost, confused, or condemned along the way. At the heart of Anubis' role was his deep connection to the concept of mummification. The Egyptians believed that the body was a critical part of the soul's journey after death. The soul, or Ka, needed the physical body in order to recognize itself and continue to exist in the afterlife. The Ka was believed to reside in the tomb, where it would need the body preserved for its continued spiritual existence. To this end, the practice of mummification became one of the most important rituals in Egyptian society. It was an intricate, sacred process carried out with the utmost respect for the deceased, ensuring that the body would remain intact for eternity. Mummification was not simply about preserving a corpse. It was about ensuring that the soul could navigate the afterlife. Anubis, with his divine connection to process, oversaw this preservation, making sure that the physical body was properly prepared. The mummification procedure involved several steps, each symbolic and purposeful. The internal organs were removed, preserved separately in canopic jars, and the body was dried with natron salts to ensure it would not decay. The body would then be wrapped in linen, and protective amulets and inscriptions would be placed around it to ward off any evil spirits or forces that might try to interfere with the soul's journey. The entire process was done with an eye toward ensuring that the deceased could continue their existence in the afterlife without any hindrances. Anubis' role as a protector of the dead during the mummification process was deeply tied to his protective nature. He was the god who kept the body safe during this ritual. But his influence was not limited to this process alone. He also guided the deceased through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where the souls of the dead had to navigate a series of trials, obstacles, and dangers before reaching the afterlife. The Duat was not a peaceful, tranquil realm. It was a place fraught with peril, where demons, monsters, and deceptive forces lurked at every corner. It was here that Anubis' protective and guiding role became paramount. The journey through the Duat was not one that every soul could navigate successfully. It was a treacherous passage, full of darkness and uncertainty, a place where souls could easily become lost if they did not have the proper guidance. For the ancient Egyptians, the Duat was a realm where the soul was tested, challenged, and purified. Each soul had to pass through several gates, each guarded by different deities and supernatural forces. It was not only a place of physical danger, but also one of spiritual reckoning. The soul had to confront its past actions, its moral choices, and its purity before it could continue its journey to the afterlife. The soul's progress was determined by the weight of its deeds, and its purity was tested in numerous ways. It was in this uncertain realm that Anubis' presence became indispensable. As the god who knew the paths of the Duat, he was the one who ensured that the soul did not stray from its course. He guided the soul with a steady hand, offering protection against the dangers of the underworld. His role as a guide through the Duat was vital to the ancient Egyptian understanding of the afterlife. Souls that were unprepared or unrighteous could easily fall prey to the malevolent forces that dwelled there. But Anubis, ever the vigilant protector, ensured that the soul would face no unnecessary harm, and that it would be properly prepared for final judgment. Anubis was not a god who passed judgment on the souls of the dead. That was the role of Osiris. However, Anubis did play an integral role in the moment of judgment itself. Once the soul had passed through the Duat and faced the challenges of purification, it arrived at the Hall of Ma'at, the place where the weighing of the heart took place. This was one of the most significant moments in the afterlife journey, as it was here that the soul's worth was judged. The heart of the deceased was placed on one side of the scale, and the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, was placed on the other. If the heart was found to be light, free from sin, the soul would be allowed to enter the afterlife and live in the fields of reeds, an eternal paradise. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, the soul would be devoured by Ammit, the demoness of the underworld, and would cease to exist. Anubis' role in this moment was pivotal. As the overseer of the mummification process and the protector of the soul during its journey through the Duat, Anubis was a god who ensured that the soul was properly prepared for this final test. He stood by during the weighing of the heart, ensuring that the judgment was fair and that the soul had been properly guided through the process of purification. Anubis was also responsible for guiding the soul to the scales of Ma'at, where the weighing took place. His presence was a calming and reassuring force for the deceased, ensuring that they were not alone during the most critical moment of their journey. Anubis' connection to the concept of judgment, though not one of active judgment, was profound. His role as a guide ensured that the soul was ready for this final test. He acted as the intermediary between the living world and the afterlife, ensuring that the soul's journey was properly conducted and that the soul's actions were given their due consideration. It was through Anubis that the soul was given a chance to prove its worth, to demonstrate that it had lived a life of righteousness and purity. Without Anubis' intervention and protection, the soul might have been lost or consumed by the forces of chaos that inhabited the Duat. One of the most intriguing aspects of Anubis' role in Egyptian mythology is the symbolic representation of his protective nature. Anubis is often depicted with the head of a jackal, a creature that was frequently associated with death and burial. Jackals, known for scavenging around cemeteries, were symbolic of the natural processes of decomposition and the return of the body to the earth. But while the jackal is often linked with death, it is also seen as protector, standing watch over the tombs and guarding the dead from desecration. In this way, Anubis' form as a jackal was not just symbolic of death, but also a representation of the natural cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The jackal's keen sense of smell also played a symbolic role in Anubis' duties. It was believed that jackals could detect the scent of death from far away, and in this way, Anubis was able to guide souls through the underworld with similar precision. His ability to detect the soul's presence, to understand its journey, and to ensure its safety was linked to the jackal's acute instincts. In this sense, Anubis was not just a god of death, but also a god of spiritual insight, with a keen awareness of the soul's needs and the dangers it faced. Anubis' duties, as complex and varied as they were central to the ancient Egyptians' understanding of the afterlife. Death was not something to be feared, but something to be prepared for. Anubis, in his many roles, ensured that every deceased individual received the proper guidance, protection, and care. His presence was a comfort to the living, knowing that their loved ones would be cared for in the afterlife. And it was a steady hand that ensured that the soul would face no harm and that it would reach its final destination, whether that was an eternal paradise or an endless journey through the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, Anubis represented the delicate balance between life and death. He was not a god of destruction, but of protection and guidance, ensuring that the soul's journey was one of transformation, not annihilation. His role as a protector of the dead was not just a matter of ceremonial duty. It was an intimate connection between the living and the dead, a reminder that life and death were intertwined, and that the journey through death was just another step in the greater cycle of existence. Anubis stood as a testament to the ancient Egyptians' reverence for the afterlife and their deep belief in the continuity of life beyond death. His legacy continues to be felt today, as his role as a guardian of souls and protector of the dead remains one of the most enduring symbols of ancient Egyptian spirituality. The story of Anubis, as a divine protector of the dead and guide to the afterlife, is not only a testament to ancient Egyptian beliefs, but also a reflection of a deeply spiritual and complex society. His significance is interwoven with the very fabric of Egyptian religion, which saw death not as an end, but as an important phase in a continuous journey. In Egyptian thought, death was a transition from one form of existence to another, a passage from the known world to an unknown realm, one that demanded care, guidance, and protection. Anubis, as a god deeply connected to this process, was pivotal to ensuring that the deceased had everything necessary to make that journey safely and peacefully. One of the most significant aspects of Anubis' role was his connection to the process of mummification. The Egyptians' beliefs about the afterlife were intricately tied to the preservation of the physical body. The body, in Egyptian belief, was not just a vessel for the soul and life. It was essential for the soul's continued existence after death. The Ka, the spirit or life force of the deceased, could not survive without the body, and so the mummification process was a vital part of preparing the deceased for their journey into the afterlife. Anubis, as the god associated with embalming and mummification, oversaw and protected this process with great care. The art of mummification was a highly specialized and sacred skill that was passed down through generations of embalmers, priests, and religious leaders. The process itself was long and meticulous, with each step designed to preserve the body in the most perfect state possible. First, the internal organs were removed. The stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines were carefully taken out, as these were believed to be the organs most vulnerable to decay. These organs were then preserved separately in special containers called canopic jars, which were inscribed with protective symbols and the names of the gods to guard the body in the afterlife. The next stage of the process was the drying of the body. The embalmers used a salt called natron, a naturally occurring substance, to dehydrate the body and prevent decay. The body would be carefully packed with natron and left for several days to dry out completely. This stage was crucial to ensuring that the body would not break down over time, as the Egyptians believed that the body needed to remain intact in order for the soul to recognize and inhabit it in the afterlife. Once the body was completely dried, it would be wrapped in layers of linen. Between these layers, various amulets, charms, and spells were placed, each designed to protect the deceased from evil forces and to ensure that the body would remain intact during its journey through the underworld. These amulets, often shaped like gods, were meant to offer specific protections, such as shielding the body from corruption, helping the soul to pass through obstacles in the afterlife, and guiding the deceased through dangerous passages. Anubis was deeply involved in each of these steps. While he did not physically carry out the work of embalming, he was the god who granted the knowledge to the embalmers, and his protective presence ensured that the body was cared for correctly. He was also believed to be the god who guided the soul of the deceased during the actual process of mummification, ensuring that it was properly prepared for the journey to the afterlife. In many depictions, Anubis is shown overseeing the mummification of Pharaoh, standing beside the embalming table, his jackal-like features symbolizing his close connection to the process. The jackal, a creature often associated with death and burial, was a perfect symbol for a god whose duty was to safeguard the deceased in their passage from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. Beyond the physical preparation of the body, Anubis also had a role in the spiritual guidance of the deceased. After the mummification process was complete, the soul would begin its journey to the afterlife. This journey took place through the Duat, the underworld, a realm filled with dangers, traps, and spiritual obstacles that could prevent the soul from reaching its final destination. The journey through the Duat was not a simple one. It was fraught with challenges, both physical and spiritual. Souls would encounter monsters, serpents, and demonic creatures, as well as forces that sought to distract or lead them astray. It was in this perilous realm that Anubis' protective and guiding role became critical. As the guardian of the dead, Anubis was the one who ensured that the soul would not fall victim to these forces. He was a god who protected the deceased from the monsters and demons that roamed the Duat. These creatures, such as serpents and crocodiles, were believed to be capable of devouring souls or leading them astray, preventing them from reaching the afterlife. Anubis, with his deep knowledge of the underworld and his role as protector, ensured that the soul was shielded from such dangers. But Anubis' role in the Duat was not limited to protection alone. He was also a guide, leading the soul through the complex and labyrinthine paths of the underworld. The soul had to pass through several gates, each guarded by a different deity or supernatural being, before reaching the Hall of Ma'at, the final destination where the soul would be judged. It was Anubis who led the deceased through these gates, offering guidance and protection at every step. His knowledge of the Duat and the path to the afterlife made him the perfect guide for this journey. In many depictions, Anubis is shown leading the soul of the deceased to the gates of the Duat, holding the soul's hand and gently guiding it. He is often portrayed with the head of jackal, standing tall and confident as he leads the soul through the dark, perilous passages. His role as a guide was essential, for without his protection and guidance, the soul would be lost, wandering aimlessly in the dangerous, ever-shifting underworld. Upon reaching the Hall of Ma'at, the soul would face the final judgment. The heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, to determine whether the soul had lived a righteous life. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul would be granted access to the afterlife and would enter the fields of reeds, a paradise where the deceased could live forever in peace. However, if the heart was found to be heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul would be lost for eternity. Anubis played a crucial role in this judgment, although he did not pass judgment himself. He oversaw the process of the weighing of the heart, ensuring that the judgment was fair and that the soul had been properly prepared for the test. In many depictions, Anubis is shown standing beside the scales, overseeing the weighing, his jackal head symbolizing his connection to both the process of death and the journey of the soul. His role was one of assistance and guidance, ensuring that the soul was not only prepared for the judgment, but also protected during it. Although the soul was judged by Osiris, it was Anubis who made sure that the process went smoothly. He acted as a kind of intermediary between the living and the divine, ensuring that the soul faced a judgment with dignity and respect. His presence during the judgment process was a comforting one, offering reassurance that the soul would not be abandoned or lost in the face of divine scrutiny. The journey through the Duat, the mummification process, and the final judgment were all crucial stages in the Egyptian view of the afterlife, and Anubis was intimately involved in each of them. He was a god who protected and guided the dead, ensuring that they received the proper care and attention in their transition from life to death. His role was multifaceted and essential to the Egyptian understanding of the afterlife, as he embodied both the preservation of the body and the protection of the soul. In many ways, Anubis was the bridge between life and death, offering both the physical and spiritual protection necessary for the soul's journey to continue in the afterlife. The relationship between Anubis and the Egyptian people was one of trust and reverence. They believed that his protection and guidance were indispensable, and his role in their spiritual life was central, whether it was through the mummification process, his guidance in the do-it, or his presence during the final judgment. Anubis was a god who ensured that the soul's journey would be one of safety and peace. Through him, the ancient Egyptians understood that death was not something to be feared, but a transition that could be navigated with care and protection. Anubis was a symbol of that transition, both protector and guide, standing as a testament to the ancient Egyptians' belief in life after death and the continuity of the soul. Anubis' place in the ancient Egyptian pantheon is both profound and multifaceted. While he is often best known as a god of mummification and protector of the dead, his role transcends these responsibilities to become emblematic of the deeper spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians surrounding death and the afterlife. The idea that death was not an end but a transition, a journey that required guidance, protection, and preparation, was central to Egyptian culture. In this sense, Anubis was much more than a figure tied to the embalming process. He embodied the journey of the soul itself, a divine intermediary that ensured the proper passage from life to death, from the earthly realm to the divine. The ancient Egyptians placed immense importance on the afterlife. They believed that the soul continued to exist after death, and that it needed to be properly cared for in its journey through the afterlife. This belief in the continuity of the soul formed the backbone of their religious practices, which included elaborate burial rituals and a deep focus on maintaining harmony and balance, both in life and after death. Anubis, as the god who oversaw the protection and transition of the dead, became integral to these practices. He was not just a funerary deity, but the embodiment of the transition from one state of existence to another, ensuring that the soul was properly prepared, protected, and guided. The journey of the soul in the Egyptian afterlife was a complex and perilous one. Once a person died, their soul would enter the Egyptian underworld, where it would undergo a series of challenges and trials before it could reach the afterlife. The do-it was not a static realm, but a place full of obstacles, dangers, and spiritual trials. These trials were meant to test the soul's purity, righteousness, and readiness for eternal life. Anubis' role in this journey was as a guide and protector. As a god who oversaw the mummification process and ensured the preservation of the body, Anubis also stood watch over the soul as it began its journey through the underworld. The do-it was a place of darkness, chaos, and spiritual obstacles. It was filled with serpents, monsters, and hostile forces that sought to prevent the soul from reaching its final destination. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul would encounter a series of gates, each guarded by deities or supernatural beings, and would be required to answer questions or overcome obstacles in order to proceed. These trials were designed not only to test the soul's character, but also to ensure that it was pure and worthy of entering the afterlife. If a soul was deemed unworthy, it would be devoured by Ammit, the demoness of the underworld, and the soul would cease to exist. This is where Anubis' guidance became indispensable. He was not only the guardian of the body, but also the protector of the soul. His knowledge of the do-it and the dangers that lay within made him the perfect deity to help guide the soul through this treacherous realm. The soul's journey through the do-it was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one as well. It was a journey of purification, as the soul faced its past actions and was tested for its worthiness. Anubis' role as protector was essential here, as he ensured that the soul did not falter or become lost during the journey. One of the most crucial moments in the soul's journey was the weighing of the heart. Once the soul had passed through the do-it and had been purified, it would arrive at the hall of Ma'at, the place where its worth would be judged. The heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, to determine whether the soul was pure. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul was deemed pure and worthy of entering the fields of reeds, the paradise of the afterlife. However, if the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Ammit, and the soul would be condemned to oblivion. Anubis' involvement in this judgment process was both symbolic and crucial. While he did not pass judgment himself, this role was reserved for Osiris. Anubis played a key role in preparing the soul for the judgment and ensuring that the process went smoothly. He was the one who stood by as the scales were balanced, overseeing the weighing of the heart and ensuring that the judgment was fair. Anubis was not a god of judgment in the sense that Osiris was, but his role was that of protector, guiding the soul through the final stage of its journey and ensuring that it was properly prepared for its fate. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of a person's emotions, thoughts, and actions. It was the heart that would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, and it was the heart that would reveal the soul's true character. For this reason, the heart was considered the most important part of the body in the afterlife. Anubis, as the god of mummification, had a deep connection to the preservation of the heart. He was the one who ensured that the heart was properly preserved during the embalming process, and that it was protected from decay. His role in the weighing of the heart was to ensure that the heart was ready for judgment, and that the soul was prepared for its final test. The process of mummification, in which Anubis played such a critical role, was not just about preserving the body. It was about preparing the soul for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed the body in order to recognize itself and continue its journey in the afterlife. The mummification process, therefore, was not just a physical preservation, but a spiritual one as well. Anubis, as the god who guided the soul through this process, ensured that the deceased had everything necessary for their journey to the afterlife. His role in preserving the body and protecting the soul was essential to ensuring that the deceased would have a successful journey through the Duat and beyond. As the god of mummification and protector of the dead, Anubis' role was also deeply tied to the concept of balance. The ancient Egyptians placed great emphasis on the idea of Ma'at, the cosmic order that governed both the natural world and the spiritual realm. Ma'at represented truth, justice, and harmony, and it was through Ma'at that the balance of the universe was maintained. Anubis, as the god who oversaw the protection and transition of the dead, was the one who ensured that the deceased remained in harmony with the cosmic order. His role in the afterlife was to make sure that the soul followed the proper path, maintaining the balance between life and death, and ensuring that the soul was judged fairly according to the principles of Ma'at. The role of Anubis as a god of balance is further emphasized by his connection to both the living and the dead. While he was a god of the dead, Anubis was not an isolated or distant figure. He was deeply connected to the living, and his protection extended to them as well. The ancient Egyptians believed that the living could communicate with the gods through offerings and prayers, and Anubis, as a god of protection, was often invoked during funerary rites to ensure the safe passage of the deceased to the afterlife. Anubis' role in the afterlife was not just about protecting the soul, but also about maintaining a connection between the living and the dead, ensuring that the cycle of life and death remained intact. In Egyptian mythology, gods often embodied dual aspects of existence, and Anubis was no exception. While he was a god of death, he was also a symbol of life. His protection ensured that the soul would not be lost in the darkness of Duat, but would instead reach its final destination in peace. He was a god who maintained a balance between life and death, ensuring that the natural order was upheld. In this way, Anubis' role in Egyptian mythology was not just about death. It was about life in its fullest sense, ensuring that both the living and the dead were connected in a seamless, harmonious way. Anubis' role as a god of mummification and the protector of the dead is one of the most enduring aspects of Egyptian religion. His significance goes beyond his association with death. He is a symbol of the balance between life and death, the protector of the soul, and the guide through the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians revered him as a divine force that ensured the safe passage of the deceased and the preservation of the cosmic order. Through his guidance and protection, the soul was able to journey through the Duat and reach the afterlife, where it would live forever in peace. In this way, Anubis remains one of the most powerful and revered gods in Egyptian mythology, embodying the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Anubis, the ancient Egyptian god associated with the protection of the dead, mummification, and the journey of the soul into the afterlife, has long captivated the imagination of those interested in the intricate spiritual and religious traditions of one of the world's oldest civilizations. His role in the grand narrative of life, death, and rebirth was deeply embedded in the rituals that Egyptians practiced to ensure a smooth transition from this world to the next. The Egyptians were not only concerned with the physical death of a person, but also with the metaphysical journey of the soul, its purification, and its ultimate judgment. Anubis, with his multifaceted role, was instrumental in ensuring that this journey was secure, orderly, and protected from the dangers that awaited beyond death. In ancient Egyptian belief, death was viewed not as an end but as a necessary transition, a passage that, while inevitable, could be navigated with the proper care and protection. The Egyptians placed tremendous importance on the afterlife and the soul's ability to continue existing beyond the physical death of the body. This belief was grounded in their understanding of a human being as more than just a physical entity. The human soul was believed to consist of multiple components, such as a ka, the spirit or life force, the ba, the personality or unique aspect of the individual, and the ak, the transformed spirit after death. These components required a delicate balance between preservation, protection, and guidance to ensure the soul's continued existence. The process of mummification, in which Anubis was a central figure, played a critical role in safeguarding the body, which the Egyptians believed was essential for the soul's recognition in the afterlife. The body had to remain intact, or Ka would have no place to return to. This belief underpinned the elaborate and sacred art of mummification. Anubis, as the god of mummification, not only oversaw this process but also provided the divine knowledge and protection necessary to preserve the body for eternity. The embalmers, under Anubis' divine guidance, ensured that every step of the mummification process was carried out meticulously to prevent the body from decaying. They removed the internal organs, which are believed to be the most vulnerable to decomposition, and placed them in canopic jars, each representing one of the 4 sons of Horus. The body would then be desiccated with natron, a naturally occurring salt, to ensure that it was completely dehydrated before being wrapped in layers of linen. Anubis' connection to mummification was also symbolic in a deeper spiritual sense. As a god with the head of a jackal, Anubis was closely associated with the act of protecting and guarding the dead. The jackal, often seen scavenging near tombs and cemeteries, was a fitting symbol for a god who was responsible for ensuring that the dead remained untouched by corruption or desecration. His association with the jackal also conveyed his connection to the realms of the dead, where he vigilantly watched over the bodies of the deceased. His role of protector was not only practical but also spiritual. Anubis safeguarded the body against both physical decay and spiritual harm. Once the mummification process was completed, the soul of the deceased would enter the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a place that was as dangerous as it was mysterious. The Duat was not a single static location, but a complex realm full of dark, perilous waters, fiery regions, and demonic creatures, all of which could impede the soul's progress. It was here that the soul would encounter a series of trials, each designed to test its worthiness for eternal life. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul, upon death, would pass through a series of gates guarded by terrifying beings, such as serpents and other hostile creatures, and would be required to give answers to these beings or face dire consequences. It was in this tumultuous and uncertain realm that Anubis' role as protector and guide became absolutely vital. While Anubis was not the sole deity who controlled the Duat or the passage of the dead, he was its most trusted guide. His deep knowledge of the underworld, coupled with his divine protective power, ensured that the soul would not become lost or fall victim to the forces of chaos that pervaded the Duat. His role as a guide was both practical and spiritual, as he was believed to lead the soul through the various regions of the underworld. In many depictions, Anubis is shown leading the deceased, often holding their hand or guiding them along a path, ensuring that they safely navigate the treacherous landscape of the afterlife. Anubis was not just a passive figure in the afterlife, but an active participant, watching over the soul as it confronted the dangers of the Duat. At the heart of the soul's journey through the Duat was a crucial moment of judgment, the weighing of the heart. Once the soul had passed through the underworld and survived the various tests and obstacles, it would finally arrive at the Hall of Ma'at. This was where the final test took place. The heart of the deceased would be placed on one side of the scale, and the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, would be placed on the other. The heart, which was believed to house the essence of the soul, would be weighed against Ma'at's feather to determine whether the soul was worthy of eternal life. If the heart was found to be light, free of guilt and sin, the soul would be allowed to proceed to the fields of reeds, an idyllic paradise where it would live forever in peace and harmony. If, however, the heart was heavy with misdeeds and injustices, it would be devoured by the demoness Ammit, who waited to consume the souls of the unworthy. This moment of judgment was one of the most significant in the entire journey of the soul, as it determined whether the deceased would be granted eternal life or condemned to oblivion. Anubis, although not the deity who passed judgment, played an essential role in this final process. As the god who protected the dead and ensured the integrity of their journey, he stood as a guardian during the weighing of the heart. It was Anubis who guided the soul to the scales of Maat and helped ensure that the weighing process was carried out fairly. He oversaw the process, making sure that it was conducted in accordance with divine law, and that the soul's fate was determined by its true actions, not by deception or trickery. Anubis, as a symbol of protection and balance, stood as a comforting presence for the deceased as they faced their ultimate judgment. The symbolic role of Anubis during the weighing of the heart reveals much about the ancient Egyptians' view of life, death, and justice. It was believed that the soul's journey was a reflection of its deeds, and that the weight of a person's actions in life would determine their fate in the afterlife. Anubis, in overseeing the judgment, ensured that this process was fair, just, and aligned with the principles of Maat, the cosmic order. The heart, as the repository of the soul's essence, symbolized not only the moral weight of a person's actions, but also the truth of their being. Anubis' role, therefore, was not just as a guide and protector, but as a keeper of cosmic balance. Anubis' connection to both life and death, his role in preserving the body through mummification, guiding the soul through the duat, and ensuring fair judgment, reflects the broader Egyptian understanding of death as part of a cyclical process of transformation. For the Egyptians, death was not something to be feared, but rather a natural progression toward rebirth. Anubis, in his many roles, represented the process of this transformation, guiding and protecting the soul as it underwent its final metamorphosis into its eternal form. Through his association with the dead, Anubis also bridged the realms of the living and the deceased. The ancient Egyptians often called upon him in prayers, invocations, and rituals to ensure that their loved ones would be cared for in the afterlife. His image was inscribed on tombs, in funerary texts, and in ritual objects meant to aid the deceased in their journey. The Egyptians believed that Anubis could provide protection to the living as well, offering spiritual reassurance that the deceased were in good hands as they passed through the realm of the dead. Anubis' protective nature was not just symbolic, but tangible, embedded in the rituals, rites, and customs that Egyptians followed to ensure the soul's safe passage. The extensive burial texts, such as the pyramid texts and coffin texts, were filled with prayers and spells to invoke Anubis, helping guard the body and guiding the soul. These texts were meant to accompany the deceased through the afterlife, providing them with the divine assistance necessary to traverse the dangerous terrain of the duat and reach their final destination. Anubis, with his multifaceted role of protector, guide, and judge, encapsulated the Egyptians' complex relationship with death, justice, and the afterlife. His role was indispensable in their worldview, and through him, they understood that death was not a void but a process, a passage that required guidance, protection, and fairness. Anubis ensured that the soul's journey was just, safe, and, above all, true to the principles of Maat. In this way, his influence was felt not only in the world of the dead, but also in the lives of the living, who looked to him for spiritual reassurance and comfort in the face of mortality. Anubis, the god who guards the dead and ensures their journey through the afterlife, occupies a unique and sacred place within the pantheon of ancient Egyptian deities. His duties, multifaceted and profound, were essential to the Egyptian understanding of death and the afterlife, which was far from a static or finite event, but rather a transformative process. The Egyptians' perception of death was deeply entwined with their religious beliefs, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were often fluid, and the afterlife was considered a continuation of one's journey. Anubis, with his association to mummification, protection, and guidance, was not simply a god of death. He represented the transition from life to death, from earthly existence to divine, and the safeguarding of the soul through its passage. The Egyptians believed that when a person died, their soul did not immediately enter the afterlife. Instead, it would embark on a perilous journey through the duat, the Egyptian underworld, a realm filled with dangers and spiritual obstacles. The duat was a place of darkness, where the soul would encounter a series of trials, gates, and hostile forces. It was a realm where the soul's righteousness and purity were tested, and where it had to navigate through various challenges before it could reach its final destination. Without proper guidance, the soul could become lost, confused, or even devoured by the dark forces that dwell within the duat. It was Anubis, the god of mummification and protector of the dead, who played a pivotal role in ensuring that the deceased soul was not only protected, but also guided safely through the perilous afterlife journey. As the god who oversaw the mummification process, Anubis ensured that the body of the deceased was preserved in a way that allowed the soul to recognize and reunite with it in the afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the soul, or Ka, needed a body in order to continue its existence in the afterlife. The mummification process, which Anubis was intimately connected with, was therefore an essential part of this process, designed to preserve the body in as lifelike a manner as possible so that the soul could return to it. The body had to be carefully embalmed and protected from decay, which is why the role of Anubis in the preservation of the body was paramount. He was not just a god of the dead, but a guardian of the physical form, ensuring that it remained intact, enabling the soul to recognize itself once it entered the afterlife. The embalming and mummification process was a sacred and intricate ritual. The body was first washed and purified, and then the internal organs were removed, preserved in canopic jars, and the body was dehydrated using natron. This process was not only about preserving the body for eternity, but also about ensuring the spiritual continuity of the deceased. The Egyptians believed that the Ka, which resided in the body, would need it in order to continue its existence in the afterlife. Anubis' role in overseeing the proper completion of the mummification process was therefore essential to the soul's successful transition. The body had to remain intact, and it was only through Anubis' guidance and divine intervention that the deceased could make the safe passage from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. Once the mummification was complete, the deceased soul embarked on its journey through the Duat. This journey was fraught with danger, as the Duat was not merely a place of rest, but a chaotic and turbulent realm where souls had to face various trials. The Egyptians believed that the soul's journey was both a physical and spiritual challenge. The Duat was divided into multiple regions, each more treacherous than the last. As the soul traveled through these realms, it would be tested in many ways: by answering riddles posed by divine beings, by passing through gates guarded by terrifying creatures, and by contending with forces of darkness and evil. It was Anubis' role to ensure that the soul was protected from these dangers and guided through the various trials. In Egyptian art, Anubis is often depicted leading the soul of the deceased through these gates, his jackal-headed form offering strength and guidance. The jackal, which was often seen in the vicinity of tombs and cemeteries, symbolized a god's connection to death, burial, and the protection of the body. Anubis was not simply a passive observer of the soul's journey through the Duat. He was an active protector, ensuring that the soul did not stray or falter. Without his intervention, the soul would be vulnerable to the chaos and dangers that pervaded the underworld. Anubis' vigilant presence ensured that the deceased was not only safe from the monsters, demons, and other malevolent forces lurking the Duat, but also guided to the correct path, so that it could continue its journey toward judgment. The soul's journey through the Duat was one of both physical and spiritual transformation. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was tested for its purity and worthiness. Only those who led virtuous lives could pass through the gates and enter the afterlife. However, for those who were found unworthy, the consequences were severe. The soul could be devoured by Ammit, the demoness who awaited at the end of the journey, or be condemned to wander the Duat for eternity, trapped in darkness. This is where Anubis' role as a guide became especially important. He ensured that the soul passed through the various stages of the Duat, overcoming any obstacles and passing the necessary tests. He protected the soul from the dangers of the underworld, ensuring that it was not lost or consumed by the forces of chaos. The final moment of judgment, the weighing of the heart, was one of the most critical stages of the soul's journey. Once the soul had passed through the Duat, it would arrive at the Hall of Ma'at, where it would undergo judgment before the gods. The heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul would be deemed pure and worthy of entering the fields of reeds, the paradise of the afterlife. If the heart was heavy with sin, the soul would be devoured by Ammit, the demoness of the underworld, and would cease to exist. Anubis, while not the judge, played an essential role in the weighing of the heart. His role was to oversee the process and ensure that it was carried out fairly and justly. He was the god who escorted the soul to the scales of Ma'at, ensuring that the weighing process was done properly and that the soul was given a fair chance at judgment. His presence during the judgment was a reminder that the soul's fate was not only determined by its actions, but also by divine law and cosmic balance. Anubis, as a god of protection and guidance, stood as a comforting figure for the deceased as they faced a moment of judgment. What is significant about Anubis' role in this process is the concept of cosmic balance and order. The ancient Egyptians believed that the universe functioned in a state of balance, or Ma'at, and this balance extended to the realm of the afterlife. Anubis' role was to ensure that this balance was maintained throughout the soul's journey, from the mummification process to its final judgment. He was a figure who not only protected the deceased physically but also spiritually, ensuring that their journey was in alignment with the divine order of the universe. His actions represented the divine care that the Egyptians believed was necessary for a safe passage to the afterlife. In many depictions, Anubis is shown with the head of a jackal, which ties him to the natural world as well as to the divine realm. The jackal, often seen scavenging near tombs, was symbolic of death, decay, and the return of the body to the earth. However, it also represented the cycle of life and death, as it was a creature that fed on the remains of the deceased, but also helped to preserve the balance of nature by disposing of the dead. Anubis, as a god with the head of jackal, embodied this duality. He was both a protector and a harbinger of death. His connection to the jackal also symbolized his role as a guide for the soul through the underworld, where the forces of darkness sought to pull the soul away from its path. Beyond his role as a protector and guide, Anubis also represented the divine aspect of transition. His presence in Egyptian mythology reflected the belief that death was not an end but a passage, a transition from one world to another. Anubis, as a god of both mummification and the afterlife, symbolized a transition between life and death, between the physical and spiritual realms. He was a god who ensured that this transition was not abrupt or chaotic, but orderly and guided. In this sense, Anubis was not only a god of death, but a god of continuity, ensuring that the cycle of life, death, and rebirth remained unbroken. The ancient Egyptians' reverence for Anubis extended beyond the tombs and burial rituals. He was invoked in prayers and rituals by the living, who sought a protection and guidance for their deceased loved ones. Anubis was not just a figure who guarded the dead. He was a god who maintained a connection between the living and the dead, ensuring that both were cared for and protected. This relationship between the living and the dead was an essential part of Egyptian religion, and Anubis, as a divine intermediary, played a crucial role in maintaining that bond. Ultimately, Anubis' role in the ancient Egyptian understanding of death and the afterlife was one of profound significance. He was a god who protected Anubis, one of the most widely recognized gods in ancient Egyptian mythology, played an essential role in the religious practices surrounding death, the afterlife, and the transition from the physical world to the divine realm. His duties, encompassing the mummification process, the protection of the deceased, and the guidance of souls through the do-it, reflect the complex spiritual beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. These beliefs centered on the notion of death as a passage, not an end, and a journey through various challenges that could lead to eternal peace or eternal oblivion. Anubis, as a god who stood as a guardian of this transition, represented both protection and the process of transformation that the deceased underwent, ensuring that their passage into the afterlife was secure, righteous, and true. The ancient Egyptians believed that the body and soul were inseparable in the afterlife. For the soul to continue to exist, the body must be preserved. The connection between Anubis and mummification, therefore, was not only functional but symbolic. As a god who oversaw the embalming and preservation of the dead, Anubis ensured that the body was protected from decay, which allowed the soul, or Ka, to recognize and return to it. The process of mummification was an intricate and sacred ritual that aimed to prepare the body for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians placed great importance on this process, believing that the preservation of the body was necessary for the soul's journey to the afterlife. Anubis' role in mummification extended far beyond simply overseeing the embalming process. He was believed to possess divine knowledge of the secret rituals that would protect and preserve the body, knowledge that was essential to ensuring the body remained intact and ready for the soul's return. The embalmers, who were skilled professionals, carried out the mummification rituals under the guidance of Anubis. They carefully removed the internal organs of the deceased, including the stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines, preserving them in special canopic jars. These organs were thought to be essential for the soul's continued existence in the afterlife, and their preservation ensured that the soul would be able to recognize its body upon its return. The body was then dehydrated using natron, a naturally occurring salt, which dried out the tissues and protected the body from decay. Once the body had been fully dehydrated, it was wrapped in linen bandages, with amulets and charms placed between the layers to protect it from evil forces and ensure the deceased's safe passage into the afterlife. Throughout the entire process, Anubis was considered the divine protector of the body, ensuring that the proper rites were observed and that the deceased remains were secure and sanctified. But Anubis' role was not confined to the physical realm of mummification. His duties as protector and guide extended into the spiritual realm, where he ensured that the soul was guided safely through the trials and dangers of the afterlife. After the mummification process was complete, the soul of the deceased would begin its journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Duat was a vast and treacherous realm, filled with monsters, hostile deities, and spiritual challenges that could prevent the soul from reaching its ultimate destination. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul's journey was not only a physical passage, but also a spiritual test that would determine whether it was worthy of entering the afterlife. Anubis, as the god who protected the deceased, became the soul's guide through this dangerous and chaotic realm. The Duat was not a static or singular place, but a vast and ever-changing landscape, with different regions that the soul had to pass through. These regions were fraught with dangers, such as serpents, crocodiles, and other malevolent beings, all of which sought to impede the soul's progress. There were also numerous gates that the soul had to pass through, each one guarded by a divine being or spirit. The soul had to answer questions or recite spells to pass through these gates, and if it failed, it would be blocked from advancing. Anubis, as the protector of the dead, ensured that the soul was guided safely through these dangers. He was a divine figure who stood between the soul and the forces of chaos, ensuring that the deceased could navigate the perilous terrain of the Duat without being trapped or consumed. Anubis was often depicted leading the soul of the deceased through these gates, his jackal-headed form acting as a beacon of safety and protection. His role as a guide was not only about physical protection, but also about spiritual reassurance. The soul, vulnerable and lost in the vastness of the Duat, needed a figure who could provide a sense of direction and safety, and Anubis filled that role perfectly. The journey through the Duat was not only about overcoming external obstacles, but also about confronting the soul's own past actions. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul would undergo a series of tests and challenges that were designed to purify it, allowing it to enter the afterlife. The trials in the Duat were spiritual tests, designed to assess the soul's righteousness and worthiness. The most significant of these trials was the weighing of the heart, in which the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. In this moment of judgment, Anubis played an essential role, although he was not the final judge. The heart, which was thought to be the seat of the soul's character and moral essence, would be weighed against Maat's feather to determine whether the deceased had lived a life of balance and harmony. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul would be granted access to the afterlife, where it would enter the fields of reeds, a paradise where it could live forever in peace. However, if the heart was found to be heavy with sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul would be lost forever. Anubis was the god who oversaw the weighing of the heart, ensuring that the process was conducted fairly and impartially. He was present at the scales, where he stood by to ensure that the judgment was in accordance with divine law. Although Osiris, the god of the afterlife, was the one who made the final judgment, it was Anubis who ensured that the soul's passage to this moment of judgment was smooth and protected. Anubis was a divine guide who prepared the soul for its final test, ensuring that the deceased was spiritually prepared for the moment of judgment. The importance of Anubis in this judgment process was not just about his physical presence. He represented the divine principles of balance, justice, and protection. As the god who watched over the mummification process and protected the soul through the Duat, Anubis was the embodiment of the continuity of life and death, the seamless transition between the mortal and divine realms. He was a god of transformation, ensuring that the soul was properly prepared for its journey, and that the deceased had the protection they needed to face the challenges of the afterlife. Anubis' influence extended beyond the tombs and the mummification rituals. His role in Egyptian society was also seen in the everyday lives of the living, who often invoked him to ensure the safety and protection of their loved ones in the afterlife. His presence was felt in funerary rites, where his name and image were inscribed on tombs, coffins, and other objects intended to aid the deceased in their journey. Anubis was also invoked in prayers and invocations, with the living seeking his divine protection for the souls of their ancestors. The image of Anubis, with his jackal head and strong, protective posture, became one of the most iconic and enduring symbols of ancient Egyptian religion. He was not just a god who presided over death, but a god who maintained a balance between life and death, a figure who ensured that the soul's journey was secure, just, and true. His role as protector, guide, and judge symbolized the ancient Egyptians' deep respect for the afterlife and their belief in the continuity of life after death. In the broader context of Egyptian religion, Anubis was also seen as a symbol of resurrection and rebirth. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transformation, a passing from one state of existence to another. Anubis, with his association of both the preservation of the body and protection of the soul, embodied this idea of transformation. He ensured that death was not a finality but a transition, one that could lead to new life in the afterlife. His role was essential in maintaining the cosmic balance that governed both the physical and spiritual worlds, making him one of the most revered and significant gods in ancient Egyptian culture. Anubis is a deity who epitomizes the intersection of life, death, and the eternal journey between them. While his domain might seem firmly rooted in the realm of the dead, his influence extended far beyond the boundaries of death itself. His role within the ancient Egyptian belief system was intricate and multifaceted, serving as both a guardian and guide, a protector and preserver, and ultimately a god of transition, ensuring that the passage from this life into the afterlife was orderly, secure, and divinely sanctioned. Anubis' function was essential to the Egyptian spiritual understanding of death and the afterlife, providing reassurance to the living and guidance to the deceased. When the Egyptians spoke of death, they did not see it as an end but as a necessary step in a longer, ongoing journey. The soul of the deceased was thought to undergo various stages of transformation and trials before reaching its final destination, the afterlife. The soul was believed to enter a spiritual realm that was both vast and treacherous. This place, known as the Duat, was a place of darkness and mystery, populated by a host of dangers and challenges. The Duat, in the Egyptian imagination, was not just a resting place, but an underworld where the soul would be tested. These tests would determine whether it was worthy of the eternal peace of the afterlife or if it would be cast into oblivion. Anubis was the god who guided the souls through this perilous journey, ensuring their safe passage. His role as a guide was not just physical but spiritual, assisting the soul in navigating the dangers of the Duat, from hostile deities and supernatural creatures to the trials and riddles that it would face along the way. One of the central tasks that Anubis performed in guiding the soul through the Duat was ensuring that it would be protected from the forces of chaos and evil. This was no small feat. The Duat was filled with monsters and demons, each more formidable than the last, each one intent on preventing the soul from reaching the final judgment. The soul was also likely to face tests of its morality, strength, and purity, designed to challenge its readiness for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians, deeply committed to the idea of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of balance, harmony, and truth, believed that in order for the soul to progress through the Duat, it had to maintain purity and righteousness. The soul was required to demonstrate its worthiness before the gods, and this journey of purification was an essential part of the afterlife process. Anubis, the god who presided over mummification, was the one who ensured that the soul's transition from life to death was both physically and spiritually prepared. He was not merely the protector of the body, but the divine overseer of the soul's spiritual journey, ensuring that it would be preserved, shielded from decay, and guided to a rightful judgment. In Egyptian mythology, it was believed that the soul underwent a significant transformation throughout this journey. In addition to passing through various tests and challenges, the soul had to undergo the critical weighing of the heart, an event that would determine its fate in the afterlife. The heart, as the seat of the individual's identity and morality, was weighed against a feather of Ma'at. This feather represented the goddess of truth, justice, and order, and its lightness symbolized the purity and righteousness required to enter the fields of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. If the heart of the deceased was found to be lighter than the feather, it signified that the soul was pure, free of sin, and worthy of eternal life. If the heart was found to be heavy, weighed down by sin, it was devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul was lost forever. Anubis, although not the one who judged the soul, played an essential role in this moment of judgment. As the god who oversaw the protection of the body and the journey of the soul, he was a divine figure who ensured that the weighing process was conducted fairly. He stood as a mediator, making certain that the soul was judged with absolute fairness, according to Ma'at. His association with Ma'at and with the process of judgment made him not only a guardian, but a god who symbolized the divine principles of truth and justice. Anubis ensured that the soul was given a proper and fair chance at judgment, shielding it from any external manipulation, and he maintained the order necessary to uphold the integrity of the entire process. One of the most compelling aspects of Anubis' role in the Egyptian afterlife was his connection to the mummification process. The mummification ritual was integral to the Egyptians' beliefs about the soul's journey and survival in the afterlife. The body needed to be preserved in a way that allowed the soul to return to it, recognize it, and continue its journey in the afterlife. The preservation of the body was seen as a vital act of protection, and Anubis, as the god who oversaw mummification, was a divine authority responsible for ensuring that this process was carried out properly. Anubis ensured that the embalming of the deceased was completed in accordance with sacred rituals, allowing the body to be properly prepared for its role in the afterlife. The embalming process involved the removal of the internal organs, which were thought to be vulnerable to decay. These organs were placed in canopic jars, each of which was associated with one of the four sons of Horus, the guardians of the organs. The body was then treated with natron, a natural salt that dried out the body and protected it from decomposition. Anubis, as a god of mummification, oversaw every aspect of this sacred ritual, ensuring that the deceased body was carefully and respectfully prepared for its role in the afterlife. The preservation of the body through mummification was central to the Egyptians' belief that the soul required a body to maintain its existence in the next world. Without the body, the soul could not recognize itself or find its place in the afterlife. Anubis, through his association with mummification, represented this crucial link between the physical and spiritual realms. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul needed a proper vehicle for its journey into the afterlife, and this vehicle was the body. Anubis ensured that the deceased would not only have a preserved body, but also a body that had been spiritually prepared for the trials of the do-it. The body, preserved with divine care, would serve as a vessel for the soul during its journey. Anubis' role as protector extended beyond the embalming process. It encompassed the spiritual protection of the soul as well. He ensured that the deceased would be equipped with the necessary tools for their spiritual journey, from spells and prayers to divine protection. After the body had been properly mummified, the soul would begin its journey through the do-it, the underworld, where it would face numerous challenges and trials. These trials were intended to test the soul's worthiness and morality, and Anubis played a key role in guiding the soul through this tumultuous and dangerous realm. The soul would have to pass through gates guarded by terrifying beings, and each gate would present a new challenge. Some challenges required the soul to recite spells or answer questions posed by the divine guardians, while others were more physically demanding, requiring the soul to overcome dangerous creatures or forces of chaos. Throughout this journey, Anubis would be present as a guiding figure, ensuring that the soul stayed on the correct path. He was not just a passive observer, but an active protector, intervening whenever necessary to shield the soul from danger. His divine guidance was essential for the soul's safe passage through the do-it. He would ensure that the soul was not lost, confused, or led astray by the deceptive forces of chaos. Anubis, as a god who had knowledge of the underworld and its dangers, was the ideal deity to ensure that the soul remained safe and secure throughout the journey. In many depictions, Anubis is shown leading the soul through the do-it, often in the form of a jackal-headed figure, his posture protective and vigilant. He was not only a guardian of the body, but also a guide to the soul, ensuring that it traversed the treacherous landscape of the afterlife with confidence and protection. Anubis' involvement in the soul's journey was critical to its success, for without his intervention, the soul could easily become lost or ensnared by the forces of evil that dwell within the do-it. He was a god who ensured that the soul reached the Hall of Ma'at, where it would face the final judgment. In the final stages of the journey, Anubis' role would again prove vital, especially in the crucial weighing of the heart, where the soul's morality and actions in life were judged. Anubis was not the judge, but he played an essential role in ensuring that the process was fair and in accordance with divine order. He was a god who ensured that the soul had the proper guidance to reach this judgment, and that the entire process was completed according to divine law. His presence in this final judgment was a reminder that, in death, just as in life, balance and harmony were paramount. Anubis, as the god who presided over mummification and the protection of the dead, was a symbol of the continuity of life, death, and rebirth. He was the one who ensured that the soul's passage through death was safe, just, and transformative. His connection to both life and death made him one of the most revered and powerful deities in the Egyptian pantheon, a divine figure who bridged the realms of the living and the dead, ensuring that the cycle of life, death, and rebirth was maintained with balance and harmony. Through Anubis, the ancient Egyptians understood death not as an end but as a transition, a journey that required guidance. Anubis stands as one of the most prominent figures in the Egyptian pantheon, a god whose role as a protector of the dead and preserver of the soul has captured the fascination of people for millennia. His multifaceted responsibilities reflect the deeply ingrained Egyptian beliefs surrounding life, death, and the afterlife, a system of thought that was central to their religious practices and worldview. Anubis was not merely a god of death. He was a guardian of the delicate transition between life and death, a guide to the afterlife, and a divine figure who ensured that souls made their journey safely through a realm fraught with dangers. His significance goes beyond his association with mummification, as he was intimately involved in the entire process of the soul's passage from the mortal world into the eternal one. The ancient Egyptians viewed death not as an end, but as a transformation, a journey that began at the moment of death and continued to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Duat was not simply a dark, static resting place of the dead. It was a vast and complex realm, filled with trials, dangers, and divine beings, some hostile and some benign. In this world, the soul of the deceased would face numerous challenges designed to test its worthiness to enter the afterlife. The soul's journey through the Duat was fraught with obstacles, including demonic creatures, gates guarded by powerful deities, and a series of tests that determined whether the deceased would be allowed to enter the fields of reeds, a paradise of eternal rest and fulfillment, or be cast into oblivion. This journey, however, was not one that the soul undertook alone. The god Anubis, with his keen understanding of both the living and the dead, was a protector and guide who ensured that the soul was not only preserved, but was also able to navigate the treacherous landscape of the Duat. Anubis' role was complex. He was not just a passive figure watching from the sidelines, but an active participant in the soul's journey, offering guidance, protection, and spiritual support as it traversed the realms of the dead. He was not only concerned with the mummification of the body, but with the soul's continued survival in the afterlife. One of Anubis' most well-known roles was as the god of mummification. The ancient Egyptians believed that in order for the soul to continue its existence in the afterlife, the body had to be preserved. The mummification process was an elaborate ritual designed to prepare the body for this journey, ensuring that the soul would have a place to return to in the afterlife. Anubis was intimately involved in this process, overseeing every step of the embalming ritual to ensure that the body was properly preserved. The body's preservation was essential to the belief that the Ka, or the spirit, would need a physical form to return to in the afterlife. Without the body, the soul would be lost and unable to achieve its eternal form. The mummification process itself was a delicate and sacred ritual. First, the body was carefully washed and purified, and the internal organs, which were thought to decay most rapidly, were removed. These organs, including the stomach, liver, lungs, and intestines, were placed in canopic jars, each one guarded by one of the four sons of Horus. The heart, which was believed to be the seat of the soul, was either left inside the body or removed and preserved, depending on the specific traditions followed. The body was then dehydrated with natron, a naturally occurring salt that dried out the body and protected it from decay. Afterward, the body was wrapped in layers of linen, with amulets and charms placed between the layers to protect it from harm in the afterlife. Anubis, as the overseer of mummification, played a key role in ensuring that these rites were performed with precision and care. His divine knowledge of embalming techniques and sacred rituals allowed the priests and embalmers to carry out their work with the utmost respect for the deceased. The process of mummification, which could take several weeks, was seen as an essential part of the deceased's journey into the afterlife. Without proper embalming, the soul's passage would be jeopardized and the deceased would risk being lost to the chaotic forces of the Duat. Once the mummification process was completed, the soul would begin its journey into the afterlife. This was where Anubis' role as a guide became crucial. The Duat, with its dark and ominous landscape, was filled with supernatural threats. It was a realm of constant danger, where the soul could easily become lost or consumed by the forces of chaos. Anubis, as the god who understood the intricacies of the afterlife, became a protector of souls, guiding them to the dark and perilous underworld to the final judgment. The journey through the Duat was not a simple passage. It was a series of trials and tests, each one designed to challenge the soul's worthiness for eternal life. As a god of the dead, Anubis played an active role in ensuring that the soul overcame these trials. He was often depicted leading the deceased through the duat, his jackal-headed figure symbolizing his connection to death and the afterlife. Anubis was not simply a figure of protection, but also a spiritual guide, showing the way through a world filled with monsters, demons, and other obstacles. The soul's journey was one of both physical and spiritual transformation, and Anubis' divine presence was essential for its success. One of the most significant challenges that the soul faced in the duat was a series of gates that it had to pass through. These gates were guarded by divine beings or terrifying creatures, each of whom would ask the soul riddles or require it to recite spells in order to pass. Anubis, as a protector of the deceased, ensured that the soul was able to face these challenges with confidence. His deep knowledge of the duat, combined with his divine power, meant that he could intervene if necessary to help the soul navigate through the dangers of the underworld. The gates represented not only physical barriers, but spiritual ones as well. Each gate was a test of the soul's ability to stay true to the principles of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of truth, balance, and order. The journey through the duat culminated in the weighing of the heart, one of the most important moments in the afterlife journey. In this final test, the heart of the deceased, which contained the soul's moral lessons, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the soul would be granted access to the afterlife, where it would dwell in the fields of reeds, a paradise where the deceased would live in peace for all eternity. However, if the heart was found to be heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the demoness Ammit, and the soul would be lost forever. Although Anubis was not the final judge in this process, he played a critical role. As the god who oversaw the protection and preparation of the deceased, he ensured that the soul had the proper guidance and support during the weighing of the heart. Anubis stood by the scales, making sure that the judgment was fair and in accordance with the principles of Ma'at. He ensured that the soul's journey had been properly completed, with all necessary steps taken to prepare it for judgment. In this sense, Anubis was not just a passive figure in the afterlife process, but an active participant in ensuring that the soul's fate was determined by divine order and justice. The role of Anubis in the weighing of the heart underscores his importance in the larger narrative of life and death. His influence extended beyond the mummification process and the guidance of souls in the duat. He was also a symbol of the balance between life and death, a reminder that the principles of truth, justice, and order applied not only to the living but also to the dead. Through his role in mummification, protection, and judgment, Anubis became a key figure maintaining the cosmic order that governed both the mortal and spiritual realms. In Egyptian culture, Anubis was more than just a god of death. He was a symbol of continuity and transformation. The process of death was not seen as a permanent cessation of existence, but as a transition, a passage to a new form of existence. Anubis was a god who ensured that this transition was orderly and safe, providing both physical and spiritual protection for the deceased. His role as a guide and protector made him one of the most revered figures in Egyptian mythology, a god whose influence was felt not only in the tombs and burial rituals, but also in the lives of the living. Through Anubis, the ancient Egyptians understood death not as an end, but as a passage, a transformative process that required divine guidance and protection at every step. Anubis' significance was also evident in the way he was invoked by the living. Prayers, rituals, and inscriptions often included his name, asking for protection and guidance for the deceased in the afterlife. Anubis was not just a god who governed death, but a deity who maintained the sacred connection between the living and the dead. He represented the divine order that ensured that the deceased were properly cared for and guided, but also that the living had the comfort of knowing that their loved ones would be protected in the afterlife. Through this connection, Anubis embodied the cyclical nature of existence, bridging the realms of the living and the dead with the hope of eternal life beyond. In the grand tapestry of Egyptian religious beliefs, Anubis' role cannot be overstated. He was a protector, guide, and judge, ensuring that the deceased were prepared, protected. Anubis, with his jackal-headed visage, stands as one of the most iconic and enduring figures in ancient Egyptian mythology. While his presence in Egyptian religion is often associated with death, mummification, and the afterlife, his true significance lies in the seamless blending of these roles into a holistic process that ensured the deceased's passage to the next world. Anubis' connection to the deceased was not merely one of guardianship, but one that spanned the entire journey of the soul from death to its final judgment. In many ways, Anubis represented the balance between life and death, both as protector of the body and as a spiritual guide who led the soul on its difficult journey through the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that life and death were intricately linked, with death not being an end, but a transformative process that would allow the deceased to live again in the afterlife. This cycle of death and rebirth was central to Egyptian religion, and Anubis, as the god of mummification and protector of the dead, embodied this philosophy. His role was crucial in ensuring that the soul made its transition from the physical world to the afterlife, passing through the Duat, the realm of the dead, before reaching its final destination. But Anubis' importance wasn't confined to merely guiding the soul through perilous realms or overseeing the rituals of embalming. He was also a symbol of the very process of death itself, preserving it, protecting it, and guiding it through every stage. When the Egyptian royal families or individuals of high status pass away, their bodies underwent the sacred mummification process, and Anubis was at the heart of this transformation. The embalming rituals were not simply about preserving the body. They were about ensuring that the deceased would be able to return to their body in the afterlife, where the soul, whether it was a Ka, Ba, or Ak, would be able to recognize and reunite with it. The preservation of the body was absolutely essential because, according to Egyptian belief, the soul required the physical form to continue its existence. The physical body was considered a necessary vessel, and without it, the soul would wander aimlessly, forever lost. Anubis, as the god of mummification, ensured that the preservation process was carried out to highest standards, using divine techniques that ensured the body's endurance against the ravages of time and decay. The process itself was meticulous. After the body was washed and purified, embalmers, under the guidance of Anubis, would carefully remove the internal organs, including the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver. These organs were believed to be vulnerable to decay and were placed in special canopic jars, each one guarded by one of the four sons of Horus. The heart was often left inside the body, where it was thought to hold the essence of the soul, but in certain cases, it was removed and preserved separately. The body was then dehydrated with natron, a naturally occurring salt, and the skin was treated and wrapped with linen bandages, with charms and amulets placed inside the wrappings to protect the deceased from any harmful spirits. Anubis was not just a passive observer during this process. He was a divine overseer, ensuring that the embalming was done according to the sacred rites, that every detail was perfect. The priests and embalmers who carried out these tasks did so with the belief that their actions were directly sanctioned by Anubis. In fact, during the embalming process, Anubis was sometimes depicted overseeing the work, either as a jackal-headed god or in a more human-like form. His connection to the preservation of the body symbolized the sacred bond between the deceased and their body. The protection of the body allowed the soul to continue its journey, reunited with its vessel when it reached the afterlife. After the embalming was completed, the soul was ready to begin its journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. But this journey was far from easy. The Duat was not a peaceful resting place. It was filled with dark forces, hostile creatures, and dangerous obstacles. The soul had to navigate through several perilous stages, encountering gates guarded by powerful deities and dangerous spirits. The soul's fate depended on how well it could pass these tests. Some challenges required the soul to recite sacred spells or answer questions posed by guardians of the gates. If the soul failed to pass these challenges, it risked being devoured by evil forces or eternally lost in the darkness. Anubis' role during this journey was that of protector and guide. He ensured that the soul was shielded from harm and could move through the Duat unharmed. In many depictions, Anubis is shown leading the deceased soul through the underworld, offering both physical protection and spiritual guidance. As the god of death, he understood the intricacies of the Duat and its challenges, making him the perfect guide to lead the soul through these trials. His role was crucial in helping the soul overcome these obstacles, as without Anubis' divine intervention, the soul might easily falter and fall prey to the dangers of the Duat. One of the most significant tests that the soul would face in the Duat was the weighing of the heart. This was the moment of ultimate judgment, when the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. The Egyptians believed that the heart contained the essence of the soul's morality, representing the individual's actions in life. If the heart was lighter than the feather, It meant that the soul was pure and free of wrongdoing, allowing to pass into the afterlife and dwell in the field of reeds, a paradise where it would enjoy eternal peace. However, if the heart was found to be heavier than the feather, weighed down by sin and misdeeds, the soul would be devoured by the monstrous Amit, ensuring that it would never find peace. While Anubis was not the one who passed final judgment on the soul, his role in this process was of utmost importance. He acted as a divine overseer of the weighing of the heart, ensuring that the process was fair and according to divine law. Anubis was often depicted as standing by the scales, watching as the heart was weighed against Ma'at's feather. His presence in this moment was both reassuring and solemn, for he symbolized divine justice, balance, and the order that the ancient Egyptians believed governed both the physical and spiritual realms. Anubis ensured that the deceased's journey to judgment was fair and righteous, serving as a symbol of truth and divine law. The concept of Ma'at was central to Egyptian belief, and Anubis was intrinsically tied to it. Ma'at represented truth, justice, and cosmic order, and Anubis' involvement in the weighing of the heart was seen as a direct manifestation of this divine principle. Through Anubis, the ancient Egyptians understood that death was not an arbitrary or chaotic process, but one that was governed by divine order. The soul's fate was determined by its actions in life, and Anubis ensured that this fate was judged in accordance with the universal laws of balance and harmony. While Anubis was deeply connected to the judgment of souls, his role was not limited to the afterlife alone. In fact, his influence extended to the lives of the living as well. The ancient Egyptians often invoked Anubis during funerary rites, praying for protection and guidance for the deceased. His name and image were frequently inscribed on tombs, coffins, and other burial objects to ensure that the soul would be properly cared for during its journey through the afterlife. Anubis was not just a god of death, but a deity who maintained the sacred bond between the living and the dead, ensuring that the deceased were cared for and protected, while also offering reassurance to the living. In a larger sense, Anubis was a symbol of the continuity of life, death, and rebirth. The Egyptians believed that death was not the end but a transformation, a necessary step in the cycle of existence. Anubis, as a god who oversaw mummification and guided souls through the do-it, was an essential figure in this transformation. He ensured that the journey from life to death, and from death to the afterlife, was orderly, divine, and purposeful. Through Anubis, the Egyptians were able to view death not as an end, but as a continuation of life, a journey that required divine guidance and protection at every step. This understanding of death as a transformative process rather than a finality was reflected in the complex rituals and beliefs that the ancient Egyptians developed around it. They saw death as part of a greater cosmic cycle, one that involved both physical and spiritual rebirth. In this context, Anubis was not just a god of death, but a god of resurrection, who ensured that the soul could transition from one form of existence to another. His role as protector, guide, and overseer was central to this transformative process. It was through his divine intervention that the soul was able to reach its final resting place in the afterlife. As a deity deeply connected to the afterlife, Anubis represented the divine care and protection that the ancient Egyptians believed was necessary for a safe passage into the world beyond. His presence at every step of the journey, whether it was overseeing the mummification process, guiding the soul through the do-it, or ensuring the fair judgment of the soul, was essential in maintaining the balance and order that was central to the Egyptian understanding of life and death. Anubis was more than just a figure of fear or darkness. He was a symbol of continuity, protection, and divine guidance, a deity who ensured that the transition from life to death, and ultimately to the afterlife, was safe, just, and in accordance with the laws of the universe.